I'd like to honor the land of the First Peoples, Native ancestors, relatives, and associates. Thanks to the community members who have embraced me during my creative journey in the city and beyond. J. Otis Powell, Bev and Bill Cotman, the Aiken family, Setu and Sawini, the Jeter family, friends and family near and far. Greetings to Zoom viewers. Thank you. I am a re-emerging artist, reestablishing creativity, returning to what has changed and no longer exists, changed realms of existence. Only the strong survive. That was my mother's motto. And that's what I heard growing up. I'd like to begin sharing a video with you. And this video is part of the journey that I'm going along, fusing the different media that I work with. And then after this video plays, and let me sync it up here. I'll continue to describe how we've gotten here. So I'm sort of beginning at the end, and then I'll backtrack to where we are now. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I guess it's close enough. Well, we're not really in sync, but that's okay. It's part of the process here. Let's just keep going here and see. So this video is a short video that's part of a series that I'm doing based on, in case you didn't guess it, time. Um, the first one I did, I entered into the Franconia Film Fest, a short video fest, and I won honorable mention. And so I've been working on more in this series, and hopefully this will still a work in progress. It will be complete for the next one. But it's also a series that has augmented reality as part of the process and augmenting the work as well. And it infuses my ceramics, my photography, my fabric, created things I've created over the years. And now I'm able to bring them together. I'm gonna just talk a little bit about my mom's history, and when the slide comes up, you'll be able to see coming from Jamaica and going through being ostracized by her family for having children out of wedlock when she was a teenager during the 50s. She had to overcome many obstacles to get to America. She never had the opportunity to go to high school. And when she came here, she tried 3 times to get her GED. And unfortunately, the last one she missed by 1 point. And she didn't try anymore because we had moved from the south side to the north side. And the same resources were not available for her. Plus, with the move, her direction had definitely changed. Our lifestyle changed a bit. We lived a few blocks from Lake Michigan, which I often use as a source of refuge. Being the younger child, my siblings being about 10 years apart, I grew up being used to being alone and finding things to keep myself occupied on my own. So this was a picture of my oldest brother, Norman, and he was a photographer. This is a self-portrait he took of himself. There's a community, Southside Community Art Center on Michigan Avenue, near South. And he started working in the darkroom there, and he introduced me to the darkroom through that organization. It's a very prominent organization helping people of color learn about the arts. I believe it is still there. And he would tell me stories about other artists there. And so he was my first exposure to the arts. And he also exposed me to the School of the Art Institute. He took me, one day we went on a trip, we went down Michigan Avenue and just explored the buildings and walked through places that I had never seen before. And of course, him being older, he was able to explore these places more readily than I. There's also a picture of here, me on my father's boat. We didn't dock it. We would just go out on 79th Street sometimes on the south side of Chicago. And that was one of his hobbies. And so we were not yachties at all, but we did enjoy just going out on the weekends just to explore the water. Water was a big part of our family. My mom being from Jamaica, she really loved the water. And so growing up, I found that to be a very kind of a safe refuge. My parents were not really social at all, half my family being in Jamaica and the other half also giving my mother a hard time for having children before the marriage and being a foreigner coming here to America during Black Power movement. It was really difficult for my mother and my two older sisters who had Jamaican accents. And so they were always being teased about it. And I was as well when I was a little in elementary school, but they sent me to speech therapy. And so I changed, lost any side of the accent that I had, and no longer said tree for threes. And it was a whole process that I went through that my sisters didn't have the opportunity. Um, but we made it through. My mother, she suffered silently in her life with keloids that would aggravate her with itching. When she got home from work, they seemed to really explode. And she described it like a tingling sensation. She never wore low-cut blouse because they were on her chest and her back. And I remember whenever we went shopping for clothes, she always had high collars or buttons. Um, Good job being everything no one expected you to be or wanted to see. After long drives with the family around Wisconsin or Michigan to a turkey farm or Indiana or Southern Illinois to a flea market, or just driving, my father would pick my mother up from work at the post office. Sometimes we would just drive before we went home. I would know we were close to home after these long drives. Driving down the Dan Ryan Expressway near 87th Street, I'd see gigantic magic kiss lips hovering over the expressway. And that was my signal that, oh, good, we're almost home. Growing up, I took sewing classes at Evergreen Plaza Singer Store because my mother did sew. And being a fashion designer was one of my initial desires in art. I would work in department stores as well, handing out perfume samples and modeling for low budget runway shows. Part-time work during high school, worked at all the major department stores, Marshall Field's, Carson Perry Scott's, and mostly in hotels, Holiday Inn and Orrington Hotel in Evanston, which was a really fancy hotel. But both my parents were civil service workers for the post office collectively. They put in 70 years, 35 and 30 years each. It was a suggestion for me to work at the post office, and I actually did for a short while going to art school and going to college. And for some reason, that was a problem with the other employees, my managers. They would mess with my schedule sometimes. So that didn't work out. I kind of moved on from there. Outside the post office, so my parents had hobbies, things they liked to do. My mom would sew. She had lots of fabric, so that was my exposure to different textures and textiles and fabrics. And my father, I think the thing they mostly had in common was shopping. We'd go along car trips to different stores, and they liked to travel as well. She from Jamaica, the first time she met was when he went to Jamaica to marry her. And so they met through the church, writing letters to each other. And we never found any of those letters. We looked for them. So during my childhood, I didn't get a lot of exposure to the arts. My father's hobbies seemed to be TV, reading, and traveling. He had a motorcycle and a mini bike and a folding bike. I had a sad encounter with the mini bike, unfortunately, my leg in a muffler, but he would fix things around the house. So I learned about putting things together, problem solving by watching him fix things around the house instead of calling someone to do it. And he also had an additional car when I got my license for me to drive that he bought at a police auction. He wasn't really into buying new cars. It was called a Rambler, and I remember it had manual brakes and steering, and I was just so happy to have it. It kind of encouraged my love of cars. So PBS Live from Off Center. These shows in the late 80s, video art, experimental performance art. That's what it really encouraged me to want to become an artist. I wanted to be able to do those things that we saw. And so in the video, I realized I was choreographing my images, choreographing time. I couldn't really organize people to do that so well, so images are readily available. And I did study, took a few dance courses at a Mo Ming Dance Studio on the north side of Chicago, and also had partial dance scholarships to Gus Giordano in Evanston. And then I went to another dance company called Dance Space, and they were more into modern dance than jazz dance. And so it was very two different movements. I wasn't really familiar with the real distinctions till I tried to go back to Gus Giordano, and I was so soft. It was just like, no way. My movements were just so different than when I had left there before. And so I started to realize that you can choreograph time, movements from moment to moment, translated from across parallel worlds. The significance and meaning of what is considered a construct, yet we move through time, even if we are not moving through space. But moving through space is most certainly accompanied by the amount of time it takes to get from point A to point B. We can go to the next one. The dark room is where seconds mattered at School of the Art Institute. I took fabric, painting, and design, and I went part-time for many years. And so I explored the different departments and landed in the photography department. This is a photograph of my father, and this is the boat that we used to go boating on Lake Michigan. When we moved to the north side, we no longer really had access to the ports, I guess, that he wanted, the docks that he wanted to go on, and the boat sat in the yard for the longest time. And my mother had finally found someone who wanted to buy the boat, mainly for the trailer. And for some reason, he decided to do this to the boat. And so there was many disconnects, and I guess this was one of the major significant symbols of it for me. And I worked nights at the hotel, so I went to school during the day. And so I was home most days, and for some reason, I was home this day, and I just took pictures of him destroying the boat with the axe. And kind of wondered what was he thinking about when he was doing that, but we never really knew what he was thinking about because he didn't talk much. Him being half Cherokee, half African American, I found out as I started to work here with the Native community that's probably a trait that he had from his ancestors. He didn't tell me many stories about his childhood when he was young. His sister did, though. And so that's where I found out about my Cherokee ancestors. And I, from time to time, still making the effort to find out more about that. During this time, I was also helping to raise my goddaughter, my nephews, my niece. Thankful for the influence of taking the kids to museums has had on their development as I've seen them grow into adults. One of my nephews is pursuing the arts as he holds down a real job because he does want to provide that stability for his family. His work seems to be quite on the edge sometimes, but after hearing that people are hiring him to do murals for them, I'm really happy that he's branching out in that way. I had a delayed pathway to play. During college, standing by Lake Michigan, thinking about the limited amount of space in our home and the prospects of transporting materials or objects back and forth, I decided to focus on the photography department. Part two, photography became my focus based on a camera that I had acquired during high school. My boyfriend and I, we had this dream of being models and working in the fashion industry with no defined understanding of what we wanted really to do. We would take pictures of each other, and at one point we even took pictures together for our personal portfolios. The camera was a joint venture between myself and him, and when we broke up, I brought him out. It was a Nikon FE. And as I went into the School of the Art Institute, that is what I used throughout most of my time in college. I did add to it, but that manual Nikon FE was the main camera. My exploration of next slide, please. So I began to manipulate images in the darkroom, and here are examples of those images. And I found myself drawn both to color and black and white. My exploration of documenting blues musicians began after a chance encounter with a classmate at the Chicago Blues Fest. During a point, I had to leave another boyfriend because he wanted to go home and clean the stove because he was moving. And I was like, no, I want to go hang out at the Blues Fest. And so that was a difficult choice for me. It wasn't. We parted ways on that day, and I don't believe we were really the same after that. My classmate and mentor, Ron Hurd, he was a photographer for different blues and jazz magazines. Magic Blues was one of them. I started working at that magazine with the editor who was, her name was Lois Urey. And I would go on interviews with her because she had founded the magazine. She was a very wise and kind and older white woman whose family had disowned her because she fell in love and had a child with a blues musician. She lived in one of the smaller projects near North Chicago. I would pick her up and we would go out to different blues shows, and she would tell me stories about the different musicians. It was quite a beautiful experience. I'm really thankful to her for sharing that time with me. And so here are some of the images that were taken during my exploration of manipulating images, creating digital montages in the darkroom before we had Photoshop, which I kind of eased into reluctantly, but then really grateful in some ways for the not wasting the water and the use of chemicals, especially when you're doing it at home. You really get a sense of what that entails. Next slide. So I started to explore more with digital montages. Neighbors said it's actually my mother in that image. She was quite one of my models I would use quite often. And she's talking to my neighbor, Miss Williams, across the street, and she never went across the street. So I had to take a picture of this. I'm not sure what she's talking to her about. It may have been, no, well, I got in trouble because they gave me coffee and she didn't want me to have coffee, but I'm not sure if that was it. But she made her outfit that she has on there. As I was looking at these, I realized that, so she would make her clothes to go to work, and that was a big influence on me. And then Grant Park, Chicago, this is an infrared photograph. Again, before we had the setting on our cameras or in a computer where you could just create it. So I would explore that quite a bit. And below that, Maxwell Street, Chicago, one of our explorations, we're documenting Maxwell Street, has changed quite a bit. Actually, the guy in the blue coat, the Black gentleman, I'd asked him if I could take his picture because we ask people before you can take their pictures, and he was like, sure, okay. And his expression didn't change. And then out of the store, this white man comes and he's so happy and smiling. And then I realized that this was right before the redevelopment of Maxwell Street, and all this changed. All these buildings got transformed into the U of M, and he looks like he's part of the U of M. So I'm thinking that's probably why he was so happy there to settle a deal. But that was my documentary photography experience. Next slide. And while doing that, I still explored personal experiences that I was going through with my family and trying to make sense of it. And often it felt like being influenced by forces that I couldn't control. So these were some of my darkroom manipulations that helped me to make sense of that, or just to articulate it. I don't think I've been able to make sense of it yet, but at least I've documented what it felt like and what it at the time. I worked at the Warrington Hotel, so that's a chandelier. It was a great big chandelier in the hotel. One of those old style, 1920s style. hotels. Next slide. Part 3. Moved to Minneapolis from Chicago in the fall of '95 after graduating from UIC. With approximately 5 years or so experience working in hotels, clerk auditors, switchboard operators, Dominics. When I moved here, I was able to put all that experience to work at a company called Appliance Parts. And then HCMC in the emergency room, then selling real estate for 3 different companies. Actually, while I was working for HCMC, I was selling real estate. And also doing part-time work. So I was teaching workshops at the U of M here, and also Jet Magazine. I had started a relationship with them in Chicago. They would send me for a few editorial jobs. And when I came here, they also sent me on this one fantastic job to photograph at WCCO at the time. And I really appreciated that. And I would also go to the high school and photograph their special graduates, honor roll students. And so that was a really special relationship that I had with Jet Magazine that I appreciated, and Ebony, Jet and Ebony Magazine, because I think this one ran in Ebony, but most of them ran in Jet. And Roxanne is really great also, so it was nice meeting her. Let's see. I also worked for a digital web company right at the first digital boom. It was Juneteenth that turned into this, they changed their name to 60-Foot Spider. And so it was interesting. I managed digital assets. They did a lot of work for medical companies, a lot of stents, pictures of stents and doctors. So teaching began fully when I moved to Minneapolis. The State Arts Board Compass roster, I would do those as well while I was working my other jobs. Going to different schools around the city and state, teaching fabric painting, photography, making books, solar prints. Then I got tired of being a gypsy and got licensed. And I've been with the district for about 17 years at about 5 different schools. Next slide. This was one of the major documentary projects I worked on when I was, right before I took a hiatus. It wasn't intentional, but I was able to meet 20 elders in the community and photograph them and interview them of where they think the civil rights movement was going back in 2002 and 2003, around that time. And so that was a really delightful experience. And this is archived online on an Instagram site. And it is also my website, but I realized I could use Instagram as a form of archiving my projects. And so I would just have a page dedicated to that project and not post anything else on that project so that it would be preserved there as sort of just a digital archive. Next slide. And so I've been doing that also with some of my travel work, my travel photography. I was fortunate when I was in school, I went on a travel study group to Cuba. And I also did some research work with my instructor there at Crisis Magazine. So these are some images from Cuba and manipulated images from Cuba. And then the Hard Times, that's actually from Mexico, Acapulco. And then this is, again, the direction that I am merging my work with, photography, layering. And so these are using silver prints that I've created in the dark room decades ago, and reimagining them now, being able to do things that I wanted to do at the time, but now technology really allows me to. Next slide. And infusing augmented reality. So this is one of the pieces, augmented reality piece, and then a self-portrait taken decades ago looking back over time. And this is my mom, yeah, my favorite model, one of my favorite models. We're moving into my ceramics. The piece on the left, the small cup, is one of my first pieces of self-expression, trying to do something different with the clay than the traditional things that we teach in the classroom. And it's actually a homage to my mom. It's a seam of a fabric, and I took that and made texture in the clay. And this was actually created when I was in a course at the U of M, so I was able to soda ash fire it. And that's where we get the different variations of tonality. And so fast forward about 10 years of the piece on the left, after teaching, I started to think about ways that I could make a personal statement with clay and turn it into my personal vision, I guess we would say. And also I was going through things where people were twisting my words, not just in the classroom like students always do. You have to make everything clear, they'll find loopholes, but even at home, I was running into situations where I would say one thing, it would turn into another thing and get really taken out of context. And so I started to think about ways I could manipulate clay. And this is how it started to evolve. I'm going to leave it here for a moment, and please forgive me if I digress into some poetry for a moment. But leaving the world a better place, I hope will be my contribution to society. I have no kids, but feel blessed to have contributed to the positive experience of young people in my life. With the Civil Rights Project, interviews, photographs, thoughts about communication, I wonder why we wander around in the sand, wander around in the sands of time, holding on to moments of joy, holding on to moments of happiness, holding on to regrets, icebergs, water, trees. Next slide. In spite of our best efforts, sometimes our bodies will not do what our mind desires or requests of it. I've become more tolerant of the fact that some goals we can only achieve virtually. The realization of your creativity is the goal you wish to achieve, even when your aspirations are beyond your current ability. These are layered, twisted galaxies of possibilities. The chains and amulets I found as a way to layer meaning to the twisted words that are already translated through the ceramics. Next slide. And trying to make my work functional as well as not just expressive, I've explored different type of vessels. Here are some goblets that are very heavy. I realize they definitely have to kind of work on lightening them up, or they just become really just heavy goblets. Next slide. And then also different ways to articulate how I wish to create vessels that can be either functional and decorative, sometimes just decorative. But the one on the left, when I do the saucers and the cup, try to make them kind of intertwine with each other as well. Next slide. And then also exploring the open cut out possibilities. And X's and O's have been sort of symbols that I've really been drawn to, hugs and kisses, positivity, trying to send that out through my work as well. And working heavily with metallics when I first started. I'm starting to add more color schemes to that for contrast. Next slide. But really working with the dark metallics and then the darker blues and purples and incorporating words into my work as well. Here we have love, Next slide. And then also my love of fabric and working with fabric. This is shibori, example before it's fully opened, and then also before it's included in one of my play pieces, it can also be worn. Next slide. And so I began to incorporate fabric as well, weaving them through. And so here we have the twisted galaxy of broken dreams and stolen lives. And the fabric is often distressed as well, shibori and tie-dyed in different manners, sometimes torn. So I'm showing the fabric before it's actually woven through the clay. And it's interesting how the colors just these colors kind of fell together naturally, but in the future, I plan to be more intentional, but these did kind of flow together. Next slide. And then adding the additional layer of chains as well for meaning. I've started to also stack my ceramics and work with that concept of being functional, so you can stack them, so you can bring them out to use them at different times. And then also thinking about the different layers of meaning that I can add with the amulets and the gears, the time theme going through this again. Next slide. This is a galaxy of pain for my name. And so my name is written in different ways on a scarf. Over my lifetime, I've had issues. My full name is Delicia Twiffy Eccles Bay, and I go by Del. And some people have the hardest time with that. I don't know why. They can call Tom as Tom all day long, but for some reason, just saying Del is hard for people. Twiffy is my father's name. And for the longest time, we thought it was Turkish, Twefy. And then I met someone from Turkey and asked him about that. And he told me there are no W's in the Turkish alphabet. So our lifelong story about my father's name was shattered right there. I have no clue where it's from. Next slide. And here's my X and O's Hugs and Kisses box. Again, working really heavily with the metallics. Really like the reflective nature, the density of it, and then also sending love out. Next slide. Some of my pieces, when I glazed them, using a pouring method, and then recently getting into using wax resist, doing the lighter color and then putting wax over it. So when I do pour the other colors over it, I can preserve the lighter color or control it, try to control it. Next slide. And so this is part of the iceberg series. Looking at the top, you don't know what's underneath, but a lot of people tend to judge things by just looking at the surface. And so this is, again, adding another layer of meaning to the twisted manner of which words can be held or manipulated, and then adding the iceberg, tip of the iceberg to that as well. Next one. And twisted galaxy of potential. And again, trying to also be functional as well as sculptural. And then having the iceberg theme at the bottom as well. Next slide. A twisted galaxy of possibilities. And both of those are very similar results, the potential for possibilities. But wanting to think about the galaxies that are out there, I'm really kind of wondering, is there a planet out there that's completely at peace? I often wonder about that because we're so divided, so much going on in this planet. And at times there's peace on this planet, and at times there's war, and it's going on at the same time. So wondering what's happening out there in the universe. Next slide. And this is my twisted iceberg galaxy. And again, you never know what's underneath the surface. Again, experimenting with the contrast of colors, starting to add more color into my work and working, again, trying to preserve part of it and see how the wax actually has a reaction to what the glazes I have found out too. This is our Twisted Blues Galaxy. I have to give some love to the blues. Next slide. And then working big. This is like one of the biggest pieces I've done, which is like 12 inches by 4 inches. I'm getting there, but planters, again, working with functional, trying to make it functional and sculptural, and this really is inspired by nature. I working in the garden, the weeds, sometimes they just get to be a bit much, and so this is kind of expressing how they can get entangled, and you can also plant something in it and allow it to overflow with plants. All right, next slide. More conceptual work. My silent bell tower. What happens if you have a bell tower and it just does not work? And these are stacked bells. Again, one of the directions that I am leading to. And the other work in progress, suspending orbits, sort of orbs, again with the theme of gears and time, and sort of suspending that in space and adding layers of meaning to that. And so I'm working on bells, and at the same time, I am doing things functional. So the bells are somewhat functional. We don't really ring bells a lot like we used to, but I'm kind of fascinated with them, especially with the woven possibilities of the twisted clay. And this one is actually in a collection of Douglas Ewart. He did a residency with me one year in my classrooms, and he has an extensive bell collection, and I'm honored to have this as part of his bell collection. I'm also really happy, I'd like to say, about reconnecting with some of my family in Toronto. We met when we were kids and haven't been in contact over the years. I was really honored to see one of my cousins. Complex having a major influence and success within the Toronto arts community as a painter and photographer, documenting the scene of African Americans in the hidden parts of the arts community lacking exposure. This is just a beginning of the end of beginning, in the middle of the end to begin again, ending at the beginning, beginning a new end. Technical information, glazed high fire stillware. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being on Zoom. Here are some of my augmented reality experiences at my website. They are also on my website, delbay.com. And yes, thank you. Any questions, please let me know.
Well, I just wanted to say, having been kind of having an inside lead and being able to see this presentation before everybody else and hearing you talk about it now, this is, I guess, more of a comment, but there's a lot of really like beautiful tension I think that exists in this work. There's like a lot of really interesting combinations where the like woven kind of clay structure, like the spinning sort of kind of drapery nature of the clay and the way you're handling it, and then the way you're adding the fabric to it as well. And there's these conversations happening, and then talking about sort of like universes and sort of the way, clay kind of lasts forever, universes last forever, but then how fragile the fabric is and sort of the way it's not archival. And then hearing you talk about bells and bell towers that are silent, what that means. There's just a lot of really interesting tension in the work that I think is really it's really interesting to kind of explore and kind of feel out those things and kind of try to put yourself in those kind of universes. I think is really fun and interesting. It was nice to hear you talk about it. It was really interesting.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thanks for sharing that. I love to hear feedback.
Yeah, sorry, I don't joke, but yeah, it's just like it's Yeah, it's really beautiful and interesting. There's something really poetic about that. And lovely.
Thank you.
If anyone has any questions online, please feel free to enter those into the chat and we will make sure that those are asked for you. But yeah, anyone has any questions, please feel free to.
Have you thought about photography and ceramics being combined together?
I have explored, not on ceramics, actually on copper, but I've seen transfers done. And it was something that I may investigate in the future, but then I'm thinking with the twisted clay, it doesn't really
Yeah.
translate that well. But then I thought about doing organic images for the center part. And so that's something that, yeah, I would investigate perhaps more in the future. Explore that possibility, yeah.
Now, you said you're getting away from the metallics. Are you looking to like expand your color palette, or is it just more like maybe like that those types of glazes just aren't doing what you want them to do with the twisted work anymore? Is there a reason you want to kind of move away from those, or?
Just expand on it because I found I was looking at my work and it started to look very monochromatic and I wanted to bring in more contrast. And I started to do that with the silver. I don't know if you want to go back with the silver. This is like with the blue and the silver lining glaze, and then you can go back just a little bit more. Yeah, this one again, really high gloss metallic, and I wanted to find some way to fuse this one and the one that we just saw on the other slide. Yeah, this one. I wanted to bring in more reflective surfaces with these. And so it's just expanding the color palette.
Yeah, I just think there's something really interesting about that mirrored finish, especially knowing that there's like this fabric work in the shibori, which is so, colorful and like almost like it vibrates with color, And yeah, that kind of reflective quality is really cool on those metallics. I like it a lot.
Thank you. And yeah, I have to be careful with the chains too. I try to use more matted chains. The resolution here isn't that great. But yeah, thinking about what I add to it, trying not to distract, but make sure it does add a meaning, a layer.
The size is the size.
The pieces?
Yeah.
They average about like 4 inches by 3 inches or 6 inches. Yeah, 4 or 5 inches, 6 inches, 7 inches. Next, you can go to the next piece. The round, this is actually about 8 inches by 9 inches across. So the dimensions are on the website. Sorry, I did have one dimension on here. Didn't want to get the slides too messy. But yeah, they are all under 12 inches so far, except for the planter, which is getting up there. But I am actually also exploring working larger as well. But again, the space becomes an issue too.
Where do you fire?
I do have fire at home, and so the kiln is kind of tight. It's not very large, and I realized that the amount of things that I bisque, it cannot be glazed together. You have to kind of spread that out more. So that's also a journey that I'm exploring more now to learn more about the kiln and how to explore that with different temperatures affecting. I've kind of stuck to my regular formula because that's what I know, but eventually I want to become more risky and try some different things with it. You go to the next one. Especially with the open cut pieces, I really want to explore doing more of those, the potential for that. And using words, more words. Positive words like hope, love, life. I actually was putting names on mugs at one time. My niece, her name has like 8 letters. Like, okay. They were just do part of the names.
That answered my question. I was, with the poetry you were bringing, I was curious to see if that ever, made its way onto the vessels, but that, yeah. it makes-
Yeah, working with words is kind of ongoing, but X's and O's, I really like the symbols with that. I think that's kind of a universal symbol. I think any country, it kind of means the same thing. I'm hoping.
Did you have a photograph montage where a spine and a ladder were kind of in alignment?
Yes.
As a meaning of what were you intending the meaning of that?
The latter has been really symbolic in my work. Actually, I was going to include one of them on these slides, but it didn't make it. And really trying to, oh, it did make it. Yeah, there's the ladder. It is actually the same ladder, but I manipulated it and made it to fit the spine because I felt they had similar qualities of stepping up and how your spine has those discs, but then also the symbolic meaning of trying to get to the top, and then what's up there, it can be really lonely. It can be not what you thought it would be. And then also how significant, how much we rely on our spine to take us everywhere. Those are x-rays that I happened to get after I was worked over. I had a episode and I've always wanted to infuse x-rays somehow in my work. And so after that, I was able to get my medical records in. And I had to find an IBM, a Windows computer to open it because you can't open them on a Mac computer. And so, yeah. I just wanted to really infuse that as symbolic, meaning for trying to make it through day to day.
I would like to say an enormous thank you to Dell. Dell, thank you so much for talking with us tonight. This has been incredibly informative and really, really beautiful. So thank you so much, and let's give Dell a round of applause.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it.